Hello and welcome to this special podcast. We have someone very special to talk to today. Keith Watts is joining us all the way from Toronto at this point in time. And as you know, Keith Watts made history in 1987 when he was elected Member of Parliament for Leicester East and became the first person of Indian origin to sit in the British Parliament since the end of the British rule in India, and only the fourth in history to do so. While he's the son of immigrants to the United Kingdom who came from India, he's considered one of the most influential individuals on race and immigration issues in the United Kingdom. He became the first ever British Asian minister in 1999. Keith, appreciate you taking out the time and speaking with us. It's always a pleasure to have you, somebody so accomplished, somebody who's done so well. And of course, you may be British, but you've made India very, very proud by what you have done. Thank you so much for taking out the time. First up, I want to know from you. You have a new prime minister in the United Kingdom. You fought these elections as well. You've been a public servant for a majority of your life. Sort of wrap up the experience that this election brought for you, and also, in a way, what has the journey been like in the last 30, 40 years of you being a public servant, somebody who's contributed a majority of his life to serving the people of the United Kingdom?
Hello, Vinay. Thank you so much for having me on your program. It is now a program that is watched by so many people, not just in the UK, but all over the world. And can I start with congratulations to you on your award that you've just got from Meta University. Congratulations. I can't see it behind you at the moment, but I'm sure it's going to be on your shelf very shortly. It's been an amazing experience being in politics in the UK. And oddly enough, coming to Toronto on my way to Chicago for the Democratic National Convention, as I landed at Lester Pearson Airport, I thought about my last visit here and my first visit when I'd just become a Member of Parliament. So much has changed, but so much remains the same. If you had told me in 1987, when I was elected for the first time, that one day Britain would have an Indian origin prime minister, admittedly not born in India. I was not born in India. I was born in Yemen, as you know, that he would serve, that he would then be called, he would then call an election, and he would then go off having lost the election. I wouldn't have believed you, because to us then in 87, when there had been no black and Asian representation, to a position now where you have 90 elected black Asian members of the House of Commons, and in addition, another 90 appointed by prime ministers of various political colours to the House of Lords, I would not have believed you. I would have said, I'll take that bet. It's never going to happen. And there you had it. Rishi Sunak is prime minister. You've had a home secretary, a foreign secretary. It's been amazing. So for someone like me, who went into politics to change the way in which the British people saw Asians, to a situation now where there's nothing else. I mean, we're not going to be marrying into the royal family, so there's not going to be an Indian origin king or queen in my lifetime.
You never know. You never know.
But in terms of politics, it's been incredible. I think looking back at 32 and a half years in Parliament, and my recent decision to run again because of a number of local issues in Leicester, I think probably we should have had term time elections. You should serve for a certain length of time and move on. I think that's the one thing the Americans have got really down to a T, term limits, where you have a president serving for 8 years and then they're off. And some of the states have that as well. I think you can serve too long. And so it's quite nice to go and do other things and attend a convention. I've always dreamed, always in my whole life, of attending a convention for one of the big parties in America. And I'm going to get my dream fulfilled at the age of 67.
Congratulations, Keith. And it's no surprise to me that you're there. Of course, you deserve it. Okay, well, we're going to also talk about some of the latest developments which have been happening in the United Kingdom. Some of them are serious, morbid rather, to an extent, but people in India want to know, perhaps from somebody like you, what's exactly happening on ground. There were riots in the UK very recently, and it brought out a situation where there was extreme intolerance towards immigrants. And you are somebody who's worked a lot on immigration and the rights of immigrants. What did you make of what has happened here? Is the landscape or the outlook or the perspective towards immigrants going through a very dangerous and drastic change in the United Kingdom?
Mm. You're absolutely right. It must seem very odd sitting in Delhi and Mumbai and watching what's happening in the UK, because so many people of Indian origin want to come and study in the UK. So many overseas students, the third largest number of overseas students in the UK come from India. I see them all the time when they have cases to bring or meet them in Leicester and elsewhere. So it must be a shock when you have other countries giving travel advice to people to say, don't go and visit the UK because what's happening. I think the whole country was shocked about the riots that occurred. I'm happy to say that in Leicester, it did not manifest itself. There were, of course, demonstrations, some in favor, some against immigration. The vast majority were on the other side, basically were glad to see the contribution that immigrants made to the UK. But I think even within the immigration debate, those who demonstrated and went outside hotels and institutions which housed migrants, they seem to distinguish between the settled migration, the settled community, and also those who come to seek asylum. And the main problem comes from this media hype about the arrival of the boats. The boats have become the big defining issue on migration. Up until now, it's been quite straightforward. You either came illegally by air, or you arrived as a visitor and then you stayed on longer, or you came legally as a student, as a spouse, with a work permit, working for a company, all that kind of stuff. The distinction has changed because, if you like, the boat people, those who come from France on a daily basis, they have now, in a sense, captured the imagination of those who demonstrated and rioted recently. And I think that's a failure of our politics. I think it's because, first of all, we came out of the EU. Brexit was a disaster. What it meant, instead of having friends across the channel, you could go and talk to the president of France and say, you're not doing your bit to stop people coming over. We can't really talk in those terms to the French and the Germans and the Italians because we're not part of the EU anymore. So Brexit has accelerated the arrival of illegal people into the United Kingdom. The second issue, I think, is that politicians in Britain simply don't talk about immigration. I'm quite happy to do so and talk about the contribution that we have made. I think even settled members of the Indian community in a place like Leicester are concerned when people come illegally and when they come as economic migrants rather than as asylum seekers. I think there's no question, if you come to the UK and you are fleeing persecution or war, that it's, of course, we open our arms and we welcome people. That's what we did for the Uganda nations and the Kenya nations. But I think where people draw the line is if people are being used by people traffickers and by those who make a profit out of people trafficking. Remember, it is the second biggest industry in the world, people trafficking, after drugs. People get angry. They go, why do we pay our taxes when actually the taxes are going to support people who live in this commune or this hotel? They really don't make much of a contribution. So I think the key thing is to have a good open debate about immigration and not just accept as a matter of course precisely. So I think we do need that great debate. We need to have a discussion. It needs to be in Parliament. You know, it's funny. You can have a debate about Kashmir in the British Parliament and everyone wants to know what happened. But there seems to be no government time for a debate on immigration where people can speak for the heart and explain exactly what has to happen. I think we're going to get to the time, Vinit, that at the end of the day, we might end up having a referendum on this issue. I've been thinking about this for a while, and this is the first time that I'm sharing it with anybody. I think at the end, we might have to do that. We might have to ask the British people, where do you stand on the immigration debate? We simply cannot go through another summer such as the one that we've had, where people, British citizens, are rioting against people who come here legitimately as asylum seekers. We
Hmm.
cannot go through that again. We cannot have all these police officers being injured. We cannot fill up our courts with fellow citizens. We have to let the people decide.
Sure.
So
Sure.
just as we had the debate on Brexit, I think we need to have probably a referendum on immigration and
Hmm.
say to the British people, how much immigration do you want? Are you in favor of allowing people to come here to make the kind of contributions that I think that we should have?
Hmm.
Uh, or do you want to limit it? Give it to the people to decide.
Sure.
Let them
Sure.
make that
Sure.
decision.
And Keith, what about the new prime minister? You have a new prime minister, Keir Starmer. What's expected of him? He is already, being criticized for using the word that he's going to use the full force of the law against the perpetrators of this extremism. What kind of a trouble has he inherited from Rishi Sunak? In fact, when he came on, the British people would have, breathed a sigh of relief that, okay, we have a change in 10 Downing Street. But here you are, replete with tensions on the street. What's expected of him? And do you think, that the politicians of United Kingdom have failed the people of the United Kingdom when it comes to the subject of immigration? They've been too liberal, perhaps.
Hmm. Well, I've known Keir since he came into Parliament. The first committee they put Keir on was the Home Affairs Select Committee, my committee. He didn't stay long because he was promoted almost immediately. I think he did about 3 sessions. He was a witness before my committee, even before he got to be a member, when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions. Very deliberative. He's one of these people who you can actually watch them thinking. He's not kind of like you and me in a sense. Okay, we're very emotional. We have a particular course of action, and we come straight out with it. I don't think Keir's like that. I think he thinks very carefully. I like him. I think after what we've had over the last few years, what is it, 4 prime ministers in 5 years? Um, I probably rated Theresa May above all the others. I think Rishi Sunak didn't have the time to prove himself. He had a very bad hand, and nobody ever votes for somebody who, in the end, plunges the knife into the previous leader. Conservative Party never like that. And I think that Keir is actually a different kind of politician. He's very deliberative. I'm sorry he's had to face this crisis, but when you are Prime Minister of the UK or India or any of these other countries, you're always going to face a crisis. How he comes out of the crisis is
Mhm.
something we have to watch. But
Mhm.
don't you feel, Vinette, what we're in now is the age of the prosecutor? You've got a prosecutor coming to be the Democratic nominee in America, a former Attorney General. You've got a prosecutor as Prime Minister of the UK, and so he's obviously going to talk about the full force of the law because that's his bread and butter. He's
Mhm.
famous. I mean, he will become famous for being Prime Minister, but he's famous for being a DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, putting people behind bars. In a sense, I'm not surprised that he said that. It's a good soundbite.
Right.
But I think the British people like to hear that. They want to hear that people who break the law are going to go behind bars. They don't want to know that they're going to be sent home to have tea in their back gardens to watch the Premier League when it starts next week. They want them out. So he's actually voicing the opinions of local people. But we can't put everybody behind bars. That's the only problem. And that's why we do have to address these issues. I
Right.
think he'll surprise people. He's
Mm.
a different. I think he's very similar to Rishi Sunak. We have these stories that they got on very well. And at the state opening of Parliament, you see them chatting very happily with each other because I
Mm.
think they're quite similar. They're basically technocrats. They're not die-in-the-wool politicians. They're not like crazy people like me, hacks like me, who started at the age of 30. They were middle-aged when well, almost middle-aged in Rishi's way, when they became prime minister. And so they act as technocrats. So there are different types of people. Maybe this is what we need. We don't want the razzmatazz and the drama of an American president. There's no cult figure here at the moment. And so I think we should let him get on with the job. But it's a baptism of fire. There's no question of that.
Keith, there's a growing feeling, within India and perhaps outside of the United Kingdom as well, that Europe and more so the United Kingdom, is coming to gather a feeling of uh, anti-Muslim, anti-Islam. Is that true on ground? Is there any truth to that? And do you think that could be a big problem? That could be one of the biggest challenges for the current government and governments in Europe and the United Kingdom?
Well, we have 10 mosques just in the Leicester East constituency. It's about 37 in the whole of Leicester. And I speak about that city more than any other because I've represented it for so long. There are not as many temples, Hindu temples, but getting there, I think probably about 30, 35. And there's a new one in existence that is coming out shortly. Actually, when I first got into politics, this was hardly mentioned. As I'm now out of politics, I see that religion is becoming a very important factor. In the inner cities in the UK, why we got the election of 5 independents, if you include Jeremy Corbyn, you've got 4 Muslim independents plus Jeremy Corbyn, one in Leicester South in the constituency next to my old constituency. This is a phenomenon. It's very difficult to get independents elected in the UK. In India, it probably happens much, much more often. But here, it is very, very unusual. And this was all about Gaza. And it's principally the Muslim community supporting those candidates. They'll be the first to admit they would never have got elected, but for the support of the Muslim community. What I don't want to see happen is other communities just putting up candidates on the basis of religion. They're perfectly entitled to do so. Of course, it was a foreign policy issue, but it's a matter of fact that each of the independents elected were people of the Muslim faith, and they're proud of it. And I'm proud that we have more Muslims in the British Parliament than ever before, and indeed more Hindus than ever before, and more Sikhs than ever before. And this is something quite different from 1987. But we have to also realize that politics is about the underpinning of values. And what I hope will not happen is that we will go down the road when it's only going to be about religion. There is anti-Hindu feeling in some parts of the country. There is anti-Muslim feeling. There is Islamophobia. There's anti-Semitism. There's attacks on Jewish places of worship. This is not just happening in the UK. If you saw the recent departure of Sheikh Hasina from Bangladesh and the aftermath, when the Hindu community felt very much under attack by people, this is happening all over the world. And the problem with mainstream politicians is that they have ridden the back of this tiger. And there is an old Chinese proverb: you ride the back of a tiger, you end up inside. Inner city politicians, when I first got elected, were very keen to foster this identity. But it's become an identity not of the country, and India faces the same issue. It's the identity of your fellow worshippers. And although I celebrate all these temples, fantastic Swaminarayan temples, I, as an MP, supported every place of worship that wanted to be built. Now we have so many in Leicester. I'm so proud of it. But the fact is, the politicians, the mainstream politicians, need to engage with what is happening in the community.
Keith, what happens to the India-UK relationship? There's also a concern in India that, if Rishi Sunak, when he was around, there was this developing warmth. There was this palpable chemistry between the Prime Minister Modi and Rishi Sunak. Keir Starmer perhaps is more of a technocrat, somebody who's very objective, may not give India the same kind of attention, the same kind of love, that perhaps his predecessor was able to. In fact, Keir Starmer was also criticized for, passing off a very lukewarm comment about what is happening to Hindus in Bangladesh. Some political analysts and experts also think that that's exactly what his stand is. He's like Winston Churchill. He doesn't really care what happens in the subcontinent. How do you respond to that?
I think these are difficult times, and I think we need a reset in relations. Let me tell you why I have to defend Rishi Sunak on this issue. People expected too much from him, especially the Indian community, because he was the first person of Indian origin. And therefore, he had to celebrate his religion, which he did outside Downing Street by lighting the divas. And he continued a tradition that Gordon Brown started with my assistance when we had the first Diwali in 2010 at Downing Street. The problem is this: because he was an Indian, I felt people were saying to him at the Foreign Office in number 10, you can't go over the top and have brilliant relations with India because you are Indian, and that's going to upset the Chinese and it's going to upset the Americans and everyone else. Yeah, imagine what would have happened if we had an Indian origin Prime Minister of the UK and Kamala Harris is elected as, a half Indian president, the other half being, as we know, her heritage is Afro-Caribbean. And then you have an Indian there. You have an Indian in India, obviously, in Narendra Modi. You have an Indian, he's gone now in Ireland. What's going on? I think that probably people try to step back. I think one of the first countries he should have visited was Delhi, because I think the center of the world has moved from Europe and it's gone to Asia. And there are superpowers now in Asia, the most important of which is India. And our best bilateral agreements should be with India. Of course, India has a responsibility of getting the biggest market. So why deal with Britain when it can only give you a market of 60 million, when you could deal with Macron and Schulz? They give us 500 million. And this is why I wanted us to stay in the European Union, because we were better inside. It was when I was Minister for Europe that Tony Blair initiated the first India EU summit. We'd never had them before, because he understood the importance of India as a superpower. And, this constantly special relationship with America, wanting to get to the White House to see Biden or Trump or Harris. Actually, get on a plane and go to Delhi. That's where your trade is going to be. Look at your diaspora, 2.5 million Indians in Britain. It's a no-brainer. It's important that we reset that relationship. And it can't be done by David. I know David, he's going to be a good foreign secretary, I'm sure. But, in the end, it's got to be done by the Prime Minister, hasn't it? And the Prime Minister has to go over there. We have to sign this trade deal. We have to make sure it happens. And we have to treat Indian people in this country with respect. I go back to the overseas students. I don't think that Indian overseas students are respected as they should be. They are third largest. They may even be now the second largest number, 100,000, over 100,000. And they are not treated with proper respect. They're not helped to get post-study work. They're discussing whether to keep post-study work for Indian students. If I was Keir Starmer, that would be the first thing on my agenda. I think it's early days. He's only been the Prime Minister for a month. I think with proper advice, he will understand that's where the future lies. It doesn't lie in Paris and in Berlin.
What about the economy? There was growth to the tune of 0.6% in the last couple of quarters, but that doesn't really mean that the UK is out of the woods. Is that going to be a priority for this new government? Or do you think the immigration problem, which is staring down the barrel right now, is going to be the problem that this government will have to contend with? Which is it going to be?
Vinod, you posed the question that should be posed to every Prime Minister and every government. You asked for the job. Now you've got it. Now you deal with this problem. I don't think Rishi Sunak would have called the election if the economy was doing brilliantly, because he got the chance to look at the books.
He made a mistake. He made a mistake by doing that.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, really, do you believe that? You call an election and then you say, I've made a mistake. And then you try to ring up King Charles and say, actually, I want to put off this election. That would have been the end of him. I think he shouldn't have called the election so early. Actually, the opinion polls were really bad. If the economy was going to turn, I think he should have let it turn, but I think he knows it's not going to turn. I think I'm worried about the number of Indian origin wealth creators in the UK who have decided to leave because non-dom status has gone, or will go very shortly, who are deciding to move to Dubai and other countries of that kind. I think this is a shame. It's a waste. Some, of course, are staying. A lot are staying. But the Indian millionaires, billionaires, the middle class, the doctors, all are making a huge contribution to our country. Having said that, I've just come from New York, and the contribution made by the Indian diaspora to America is phenomenal. What they've achieved. I mean, I had a meeting with the head of the top cardiologist at the Sinai Hospital in Mumbai, who's an Indian, and other people at the White House, people running for president, people running for governor, senator, Congress, wealth creators. I didn't even know that the chief executive of Chanel was an Indian woman.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, Chanel of all things,
Chanel.
Starbucks. Look at the success Indians have had there. So
Starbucks not anymore. Starbucks not anymore.
not anymore. we didn't drink enough. You went to Costa. That's the problem, Vinit. And whenever you go, you're an influencer. If you decide to drink coffee there, they or Cafe Day, nobody wants to go to Starbucks. But I think that the real problem is if we see a drain away and Indians make the decision, actually, I'm not going to study in Britain because I'm better off in Australia. I'll pay the extra money and go to America. It'll be a big loss. So don't play politics with Indian students in the UK because they can vote with their bank balances and decide not to come here. Give them post-study work, help them work, allow them to get their visas because they want to work legally and properly. But the economy is in a really bad state. Taxes, I'm sure, are going to go up. And that's going to be a real problem for anyone probably who earns over £50,000. I don't know what that is in rupees, but that's coming in October. And I think that the previous government knew this was happening, and that's probably one of the reasons why he decided to go.
You know, Keith, I was a part of a debate yesterday, and I have to ask you this question where we were talking about the Bengal famine, which happened in 1943. Winston Churchill is obviously to be blamed for that. And there is still a conversation that's happening in India that, the British should apologize for what happened then. Of course, Shashi Tharoor keeps talking about reparations that, the United Kingdom owes India. But the fact of the matter is, we have immigration to the United Kingdom. I mean, of course, that's also run into a lot of problems. If you look at, people who want to study medicine or cater in the medical fraternity, they are having problems. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of these wrongs that have happened in the past between India and the United Kingdom don't seem to be going away. Don't seem to be going away because there seems to be some sort of an apathy on behalf of the British politician. Do you think that is something that also should be talked about? That is also something that should be discussed. 10 million people died in the Bengal famine. It's being declared as a genocide. It perhaps might happen. Where are you placed on that? I want a short answer from you on that because we've run out of time as well.
Of course. First thing is hand back the Kohinoor diamond. You hand back the Kohinoor diamond and put another diamond in the crown. No one's really going to notice and miss it because it's not worn very often. So the next visit they make, take the diamond with them, hand it back to the Prime Minister. India will never get the compensation it deserves. And I think that the Prime Minister of India is probably not willing to ask these questions because in a sense that we feel we've gone beyond that. But a fulsome apology for what was done, for the deaths that were created, beyond the Gaza scale, the genocide that has been committed every single day is nothing compared to what India has been through. And as you're right, Shashi Tharoor bangs on about this quite rightly whenever he speaks about this. A big, fulsome apology. They'll never pay compensation because Britain has no money left to do this, I'm afraid. But the symbolic handing over of the Kohinoor diamond, obviously you will do the coverage. I can't think of anyone else but you, Vinit, who could do the coverage of that handover ceremony. And I think the people will be really pleased about that. I think the worry is once you hand over one thing, they'll be asking for all the others to be, send back Priti Patel, send back Keith Vaz, all these other diamonds that have been sent over. But I think that symbolic decision to hand back the Kohinoor diamond would make a big difference. And then I think we could probably draw a line. They're never going to get the compensation. Never. It's never going to happen. So there's no point in asking. But I think that symbolism and that apology is very important.
All right, Keith, you did not pull any punches. You took all my questions head on. And I can, every time I speak to you, I can see why you've been such a successful leader. And you continue to inspire. You continue to, in fact, invoke a lot of confidence whenever you speak in people like me. Thank you so much for taking out the time and speaking to us. It's always a pleasure and hope to see you in March 2025. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinay.